Hi, I'm Max Keiser. This is the Keiser Report. You know, we got those fools on the run. Not only are we the bankers with this show, but we got folks like WikiLeaks going after them, taking it from the cyber direction. We got them in the crosshairs. They got the pincer move. We're going to damage them badly. Let's talk to Stacy Herbert. Hello, Stacy.
Max Keiser. Well, you know what? It might be time to short JP Morgan. This is according to marketshorter.com. JP Morgan besieged on several fronts: silver, WikiLeaks, lawsuits, ForeclosureGate. So they're chronicling ForeclosureGate and all these bad debts that they own, and WikiLeaks. Then they say, quote, "To make matters worse, the company is embattled in several legal suits and other allegations of fraud, including market manipulation of silver contracts, front-running exchanges, and of course, the robo-signing fiasco." Then, the new grassroots silver squeeze campaign against the bank could lead to serious repercussions.
That's right. The very campaign that we've talked about on this show, Keiser Report, Buy Silver, Crash JP Morgan, has now gone international. It's being covered by the international press.
Well, speaking of a face and a name, part of the object of this is Jamie Dimon. Well, I'm going to turn to a video that this MarketShorter.com article links to, Dimon's Troubled World.
Let's talk about the sore spots in Jamie Dimon's portfolio, and then we'll get to the fact that this was the guy we thought walked on water.
You thought he walked on water. We know he's got financial leprosy.
Well, that's why he has the sore spots.
Exactly.
So then she goes back to asking the question.
Let's tackle the sore spots first.
Yeah, the sore spots right now really is his mortgage portfolio. A lot of people don't realize this, but 80% of JP Morgan's mortgage portfolio is either credit impaired from the Washington Mutual acquisition, it's subprime, or option arms. It's kind of, these are not very good assets according to analysts.
Yeah, 80% impaired. That's not good. He's got financial gonorrhea, Jamie Dimon.
That's probably why he has all those sore spots they keep talking about.
You need, silver's a good antiseptic as well.
But the mortgage crisis doesn't end there. Next headline reads, Gasparino, Bank of America, is worried next WikiLeaks dump will contain evidence of fraudulent countrywide loans. So this is Charles Gasparino, talking on Fox Business News, and here's what he had to say.
And here's the problem for Bank of America. They bought Countrywide Financial, which was one of those purveyors of subprime loans to high-risk people. And if those loans have been, are deemed to be fraudulent, if these gigabytes of memos, basically show that those are fraudulent loans that were given, particularly during a housing bubble, Bank of America could be on the hook for billions of dollars. And that's what the big fear is in Bank of America.
That's right, billions of dollars on top of billions of dollars on top of trillions of dollars. And because, let's talk serious for a moment. Come closer. Because Obama and Bernanke and Geithner are not actually putting these guys in jail or introducing any serious financial reform, but instead dealing with this contagion of financial leprosy and gonorrhea by issuing multi-trillion-dollar US dollar bundles of fiat nonsense, it's a guarantee on gold and silver going to the moon. Because Obama is a weak-kneed jellyfish, precious metals go higher. I don't see Obama growing a spine anytime soon. Therefore, there's no hurry to sell any of my precious metals. As a matter of fact, I'm a buyer.
Well, also at the same time, Janet Tavakoli in the past week spoke before the Federal Housing Finance Agency, and she gave a presentation called Repairing the Damage of Fraud as a Business Model, talking about this very situation that we just saw. Bank of America is living in fear that they're going to have to buy back all these bad, fraudulent debts from Countrywide, and also JP Morgan's causing sore spots on Jamie Dimon's whatever. But one of her cards reads, many CDOs and virtually every CDO squared were more fraud to cover up fraud.
Ponzi scheme. Look, a collateralized debt obligation, or CDO, is a fictitious, nonsensical piece of paper cooked up by quants on crack who live in a dorm room next to Wall Street while they're stealing old ladies' pension money. A CDO squared is just that, fraud squared. Okay? It's it's just exponentially more fraud to cover up bad fraud. I mean, imagine, you remember that movie Boys from Brazil where they cloned Hitler? That's what a CDO squared is. They're cloning fraud.
Well, Janet Tavakoli explains it like this. FUBAR Finance, CDO Hawala. You bury my losses, I'll bury yours.
Right. Well, Janet Tavakoli is reaching deep into the current vernacular to come up with FUBAR, which you can look up on Google and find out what that stands for. But yeah, I agree with her. And she also makes the note that this is fraud as a business model. It's an assembly line of fraud. America is fraud. They should just replace the whole Stars and Stripes with some facsimile of a Stars and Stripe, make it a banana republic, make it like pineapples and fake zirconian gemstones. It's a complete farce.
Well, of course, she's talking about how to undo the damage caused by fraud as a business model for America. And an integral part of that, of course, is the Department of Justice. One would think that arresting a few of these bankers who pushed these fraudulent mortgages upon the population and then sold these fraudulent mortgages to our pension funds would, the Department of Justice would be going after them. But no. Headline reads, Department of Justice crackdown on Wall Street is just a PR stunt targeting small-time crooks. So this is about Operation Broken Trust. And this is Attorney General Eric Holder is going after a collection of Ponzi schemes, foreign currency frauds, investment scams, and other market cons. So there are 343 defendants facing criminal charges, 189 facing civil charges, for a sum total of $8.3 billion in investment scams they operated.
Ooh, how outrageous. We're going to let the $5 trillion in scams go by the wayside.
Well, actually, this article on Zero Hedge cites Andrew Ross Sorkin in the New York Times, who says something similar to that in his article, Pulling Back the Curtain on Fraud Inquiries. He says, but fraud at big corporations surely dwarfs by orders of magnitude the shareholders' losses of $8 billion that Mr. Holder highlighted. If the government spent half the time trying to ferret out fraud at major companies that it does tracking pump and dump schemes, we might have been able to stop the financial crisis.
Well, the rest of the world is not fooled. The rest of the world is getting out of really the focal point of all this fraud, which is the U.S. dollar. So you've got Russia, China doing deals outside of the dollar. Everyone's dumping the dollar. Nobody wants the dollar. And at some point, they're going to roll the dollar completely out of existence into some roll-up with some fakakta, SDR, fiat, nonsensical currency, and everyone's going to take a 50% haircut on their prices in the U.S., and food and energy is going to double or triple in price overnight. And you're talking about instantaneous 20 million people now in the poverty rolls to join the already 50 million people in the poverty rolls, to join the already record number of people on food stamps, to join the record number of people without health care, to join the record number of people unemployed, to join what is basically an economy in depression, to join what is essentially the Depression Part 2. America is finished.
Well, actually, Max, that's in my very final headline, Down from the Pedestal. According to a new Allstate National Journal Heartland Monitor poll, 1 in 5 Americans said the U.S. economy is the world's strongest, but nearly half picked China.
It's the strongest smelling. The U.S. economy is the strongest smelling economy.
Well, only 20% of Americans think the U.S. economy is the strongest. 50% think China is. So they already see themselves as sliding down the scales, and they're just giving up.
And as they should. I think the first step toward in the grieving process is to just let go. I mean, forget about if your country is gone. I mean, you're going to have to create a new country and look around and, pick a country that you think is a good country to model yourself after, like maybe Chile or something like that, or Brazil. Start all over again. Start from scratch, because this experiment, the American experiment, which lasted 230 years or so, is finished. I took my own poll. I called people on the phone last night, and I asked people in America, I said, given the choice between having Barack Obama as your president for the second term or Max Keiser, 9 out of 10 people selected Barack Obama.
So which one of those 10 people in your family didn't want you as president?
Well, right, they don't see the value of it right now. Just wait until things shake out a little bit more.
And then going along with this, Max, so they've given up on the U.S. economy, the American consumer, as we see here. They used to be citizens, remember. They're now consumers. So they see China as the strongest one. So I think as they're drowning, however, they're trying to take the strong one with them. Americans plunge deeper into debt. Contrary to the perception that consumers are diligently paying what they owe, Americans are actually plunging deeper into debt. Americans accumulated $6.5 billion in credit card debt between July and September of this year, according to a study from cardhub.com. Between April and September, the study says consumers increased their debt by 11% over the same period last year. So the misperception is that Americans are paying down the debt. And the reason given for that is that, in fact, credit card debt decreased by $10.3 billion due to all of these banks, as we were talking about earlier, wiping out all their bad debts. They marked down $16.8 billion in bad debts. American consumers then added $6.5 billion more.
Well, this brings up an interesting point. You say it's all about accounting fraud. There's no actual underlying productive economy. People don't go to work, manufacture something, and sell it abroad and pocket a few dollars and save that money and have a growing economy. What they do engage in is accounting fraud. Everybody in America thinks that they're a hedge fund manager, and they think that by putting money in this credit card into that credit card and switching it out of this credit card, they think they're George Soros in their head, and they're living like billionaires. But in fact, they're just going into like a degenerate casino backlot scum cycle where they wake up in a pool of their own vomit, and they wonder, how the heck did we end up here? Wake up. Wake up. All right, Stacy Herbert, that's all the time for we have on this portion of the Keiser Report. Thanks so much for being here again.
Thank you, Max.
All right, now when we come back, I'll be going to New York City to speak with Michael W. Hudson about his new book, The Monster. Hi, welcome back to the Keiser Report. All righty, time to go to New York and talk with award-winning journalist Michael W. Hudson. Michael is the author of a new book, The Monster: How a Gang of Predatory Lenders and Wall Street Bankers Fleeced America and Spawned a Global Crisis. Michael Hudson, welcome to the Keiser Report.
Thanks for having me on, Max.
It sounds like a horror film. What is The Monster?
I named the book The Monster partly in recognition that this tiny little marginal market, the subprime mortgage business, grew, from the early 1990s, grew into this monster that was capable of crashing the economy and causing a global a crisis. The monster is also the name of a sales pitch that one of the companies I investigated, First Alliance Mortgage, which was closely associated with Lehman Brothers, used to pull the wool over the eyes of homeowners. The monster actually was a 2-hour sales presentation, most of which didn't even deal with the loan. Most of it was sort of like a psychological encounter session where the loan officers asked the homeowners lots of questions about their hopes and fears and dreams. They called it finding the pain. And if you could find the pain and get people to cry, often the managers would give the loan officers bonuses for getting people to break down in tears. If you could do that, then you could pretty much tell them anything. And that's where The Monster came in, which was a real sort of mathematical song and dance, which actually persuaded pretty smart people that paying a higher interest rate would save them money in the long run. And you would find people who would end up getting stuck paying 20 upfront points, $20,000 in upfront points on a $100,000 loan.
Yeah, now you're talking my language. I worked at Shearson Lehman Brothers, and of course all the high pressure sales techniques from Lehman Brothers of the 80s with Marty Shafroff and his book. And Stewie Travis was a legendary high-pitch salesman on the phone at that time. And you're right, that's the technique. If you get people emotionally involved, you can steal money from them a lot quicker. Lehman Brothers was an expert at it, and they spread out all over Wall Street. And they took that technique to all these firms. And then when the stock market crashed in 2000 with the dot-com, they took this to the real estate brokerage market. So here you've got all these phone salesmen and salesmen using this technique of emotionally torturing people, really. It's the same way you torture people. You get them softened up, and you steal their money, and you get a big fat commission, and it's beautiful. It's America. It's the American dream, to rape and pillage your fellow Americans using this advanced sales technique. So I understand AmeriQuest was also a company that's kind of like the who's who of financial rapists. Tell us about AmeriQuest.
Right, AmeriQuest started. Its corporate forebear was a small savings and loan in Orange County, California, Long Beach, SNL. And a guy named Roland Arnault, who was an immigrant from France, came to America, got his start selling eggs door to door with his brother in the 50s, started selling flowers on the street corner in LA, and eventually became a real estate developer, and then started a savings and loan with the idea of just bankrolling his own development projects in and around Los Angeles. But in the late 80s, as the SNL business was starting to crash and burn, he realized that the real money was in making subprime mortgages. And he grew his company from a pretty small player into the largest subprime lender by 2004, 2005, the largest in the U.S. He became a billionaire 3 times over. He was President Bush's largest source of financial cash in the 2004 election cycle, and Bush nominated him as the U.S. ambassador to the Netherlands.
Right, so financial rape pays big, and you take the proceeds from financially raping people in America, and you use that to fund the political campaigns, particularly in the Republicans, but the Democrats are not shy about this with Clinton and Robert Rubin, direct beneficiaries of the troops on Wall Street and around the country, just digging into people's net worth and their bank accounts, extracting their net worth, and really causing unbelievable damage. Now, I understand that J.P. Morgan, who's under investigation for all kinds of stuff, including silver manipulation all over the world, 80% of their portfolio, they have it now listed as impaired. Of course, they acquired Washington Mutual, which was one of these bucket shops. Similar to Mozilla's shop, Countrywide Credit. These are just bucket shops. If you read, the history of Wall Street is replete with the stories of these famous bucket shops. And the term comes from salesmen actually wearing a bucket on their head because they're packed so tightly into these little enclaves on Wall Street to sell snake oil and garbage to people. So what's going on with J.P. Morgan? 80% of the portfolio is impaired. I assume that this is a balance sheet risk that's ever going to have to be realized by the company, or are they going to force it onto the taxpayer as they've done so far?
I haven't dug that deeply into where J.P. Morgan is now. I do know that part of the problem with Washington Mutual, which, the problem that J.P. Morgan has now inherited, had to do with, we go back to Roland Arnault. He split his company in the late 90s into 2 pieces. One was Long Beach Mortgage, and the other was AmeriQuest. He kept AmeriQuest. He spun Long Beach Mortgage off, and then eventually Washington Mutual bought Long Beach Mortgage. And a lot of the problem loans that Washington Mutual ended up making were done through the Long Beach Mortgage arm.
Right, and of course all the tentacles of the octopus are connected through the central bank, and now Bernanke's on TV being openly mocked by folks all over the country for his doublespeak and open mendacity. The recent 60 Minutes interview where he just openly lied. And it was horribly embarrassing for America. Rumor has it that WikiLeaks will release documents Bank of America relate to countrywide mortgage fraud. If WikiLeaks releases these documents, Michael Hudson, what should we look for? How will this play out?
Well, the problem is we don't know what the documents are going to be yet. If they are, as you say, related to Countrywide, there's a lot of interesting stuff there. Countrywide is interesting because, Angelo Mazzillo in the sort of in his early years was distrustful of subprime. He didn't want to get his company into it too deeply. But once he saw where the market was going and folks like Roland Arnault and AmeriQuest were making so much money, Countrywide kind of came in with a vengeance. And as the biggest lender of any stripe, it was really able to do a lot of damage. And there's lots of allegations about Countrywide loan salesmen doing bait and switch salesmanship, kind of posing. I think the California Attorney General lawsuit alleged that Countrywide loan officers, basically salesmen, were posing as financial advisors. They were trying to portray themselves as helping people plan their finances as they were getting these mortgages.
Yeah, Janet Tavicoli wrote a great piece on Huffington Post this past week, Fraud as a Business Model. And my work on Wall Street and my observation of Wall Street for 25 years is that fraud is the model. There's nothing that's not, every single piece of the entire industry is completely saturated in fraud. And Mazzillo, of course, was caught committing fraud, and he had to disgorge part of his profits. So what does that tell this generation? You know, steal as much as you can. If you get caught, pay a few pennies, and you're okay.
You know, it's interesting with Mazzillo. Basically, by my calculation, he ended up paying about 16 cents on the for every dollar that the government had claimed that were ill-gotten gains once he settled out of his own pocket.
Well, that's a heck of a deterrent. I think they call that moral hazard on the street, but I don't think anyone has any compunction about committing these types of crimes anymore. Michael Hudson, you talked about some mortgage surprises. What about Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac? What do you see there?
Still big problems. It looks like the taxpayers are going to be on the hook for lots and lots of money to keep Fannie and Freddie on life support. You know, my reporting showed that Fannie and Freddie probably were less, took less risk and were less reckless than some of the Wall Street bankroll private lenders. But still, they took a lot of chances, and especially at the end as they were trying to catch up market share, trying to regain some of their market clout. They bankrolled a lot of risky loans, and now the taxpayers are on the hook for it, and there are a lot of homeowners who are suffering because they ended up in bad deals.
Bank of America, they are now looking to be on the hook for these putbacks of these mortgages. People are talking about a multi-trillion-dollar problem there. Is that what you're seeing?
Folks on Wall Street and in the mortgage industry, set up this machine where there wasn't a lot of accountability. A small lender or mortgage broker makes a loan and then pushes it up the line to another player who pushes it up to another player, and on and on and on. And so there were all these layers, and if someone said, oh, I was defrauded, I was taken advantage of, the people at the top could say, oh, well, no, that wasn't us. That was the little lender or little mortgage broker. But of course, by that time, the small lender or the mortgage broker had gone out of business, or had moved to another state, or was operating under a different name, which left the homeowner in the cold in terms of having anybody to sue. Now that's come back to bite the big players like Bank of America, because when they try to push these loans back and hold accountable, there's no one for them to push the loans back on, and they get stuck with the responsibility.
What kind of size liability are we talking about? Some have estimated it's as high as $6 trillion, which would be bigger than the Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac problem.
Max, again, I'm bad at predicting. When you start getting that many zeros at the end of a number, it sort of makes my head spin. So I'm not really sure how big it's going to be. It's definitely a problem, and it's something that I think Bank of America officials, the media, and top people in government really need to dig into and understand.
Michael Hudson, it seems that every time these banks are caught breaking the law, they simply change the law. And in the case of these fraudulent mortgage papers, in particular the law about interstate notary requirements, remember Obama simply put a pocket veto in his pocket to avoid having to confront that issue, but presumably when it's convenient, they will modify the law so that the banks don't have to, again, they don't have to comply with the law because they're constantly modifying the law. So how does that work? In other words, the bankers can just break the law whenever they want, and when they get caught, they change the law. Is that pretty much what happens?
That does often seem to be the case. And even when a new law is passed, such as the Dodd-Frank financial reform bill, that doesn't mean that it's going to be enforced. Alan Greenspan, there were laws on the books that would have allowed Alan Greenspan and the Fed to intervene in the mortgage market and go a long way toward reining in many of the bad practices, but they didn't enforce the law. So now we're in a battle. We passed this financial reform legislation earlier this year. Now we're going to have just as big a battle, just as bitter, just as much lobbying, just as much backroom arm twisting on the implementation of the law, on the rulemaking, and on the enforcement.
Okay, so they don't comply with the law. until such time as they get caught blatantly breaking the law. Then they try to change the law. So they just have no respect for the rule of law. So how can you have a country when you're the biggest component of the economy, which is the banking and banking services component, is just flagrantly violates the law as a business model? What kind of country is that?
You know, we have a problem with accountability right now. We don't have a system where political players, big financial players are being held accountable for their actions.
Okay, Michael Hudson, thanks again for being on the Keiser Report.
Great, thanks, Max.
All righty, and that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacy Herbert. I want to thank my guest, Michael Hudson. If you want to send me an email, please do so at keiserreport@rttv.ru. Until next time, this is Max Keiser saying bye, y'all.